30 years in broadcasting, and she got her start in Florence. You'll meet her coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Elizabeth Maddox Chapin Building on the Grand Strand campus of Horry Georgetown Technical College. We're visiting with Diane DeVaughn Stokes, the producer of Southern Style and the president of Stages Video Productions. Good morning, Diane.
Hi, Greg. It's great to have. I'm so glad you had me back.
An incredible opportunity to highlight your life, and of course the thrill last time we were together a couple months ago. The excitement of being there at the Myrtle Beach Herald Star, and obviously focused on carousel horses and your life as a broadcaster. Almost 30 years now. Is it 30 years, Diane?
I don't look that old, do I?
No. You look like my sister.
Oh,
it's crazy.
Thank you. Well, you know, I don't feel like I've been doing it for 30 years, and but there are times I sit back and I think when I start talking about people that I knew, or I know half the people the roads are named after now, I realize that I'm getting up there.
Golly, Diane, I think it was 11 years in the PD area, almost 18, 19 years now down at the beach, almost 30 years in broadcasting. It is incredible.
Actually, it's really exactly 30 years in broadcasting for me, because I started as soon as I finished Francis Marion College at the time, which is now Francis Marion University. I started 30 years ago right out of school.
Amazing.
And of course I started in radio and then branched out into television.
Diane, when someone asks you where is home, that's a tough answer.
Well, of course, I believe that home is where your heart is now, and so I do say Myrtle Beach. I was born in New Jersey, but I've never claimed New Jersey because I left there when I was 13 years old. I lived in Pennsylvania for a year, and then my dad was transferred to Florence, South Carolina. I do consider Florence a big part of my heart and home because I went to high school and college there. And my parents are still in Florence, so Florence is also home to me.
Golly, Diane. Did you study music or dance when you were a child?
No, I would have loved to, but I really didn't have that kind of opportunity. I was very fortunate that I was in church choirs. And, of course, every time there was a school production, a musical, or an entertainment sort of thing, I was always raising my hand to volunteer. I was never fearful of a camera. I was never afraid to get in front of an audience. Frankly, I was the first kid to volunteer to do the book reports at school.
Wow.
So, you know, I always enjoyed that sort of thing. My parents don't understand that. They say, where did you get this from? I mean, my mother would never want to go on television or radio. My mom was actually invited many years ago to go on Channel 15's PD People when I used to host that show. And she was invited to come on after I had been there 1 year. They were going to salute me for 1 year on the air.
Right.
And my mom couldn't come on as my mom. She dressed as a duck in a costume and just quacked the whole time because she's a clown.
Kidding.
But she just said she just couldn't do that sort of thing, so she doesn't know where I get these genes.
Wow, Diane. You mentioned Francis Marion. You mentioned Francis Marion at an early stage. What was Francis Marion like when you were there?
Well, it's kind of ironic that you would ask me that, because just a few years ago, I was invited to go back to Francis Marion and be the historian at the 25th anniversary of Francis Marion College. Now, that makes you feel old. And I sat back and as a matter of fact, I had come in from working that day, and my husband said, Diane, the college called today, and they want you to be the historian at the 25th anniversary. And I said, what? Has it been that long? But anyway, of course, I started at the college when it was still the University of South Carolina at Florence. And I attended the university right out of high school. And it was a unique campus because it was the sort of thing in my first year there that it was a 2-year campus, and then you would move on to Columbia. So I had all intentions of moving on to Columbia. But in my second year at the University of South Carolina at Florence, it became Francis Marion, and it was so exciting being a part of a college. It was an education in itself, because as an active student on student government, I was the president of my class, and I was a cheerleader, and I was very involved in things on campus. We were having an opportunity to get involved with decision-making in the college. I was on the first committee to name the Francis Marion Patriot as our mascot.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, Greg, many years ago there was a big battle on campus. There were a group of students that wanted us to be the Francis Marion Swamp Foxes, and there was a group who wanted to be the Francis Marion Patriots. Well, I headed up the Patriot group. We didn't want to be the Swamp Foxes because there were already the high school group in Hartsville, Red Foxes. There was also a high school group, the Swamp Foxes, and we wanted to be unique. So we fought long and hard, and so even now, every time I hear the term Francis Marion Patriot, I'm so proud that I served on that committee. But even as students, we helped to design the school logo. We helped in all of the early decision makings, and that was thanks to Dr. Walter D. Smith, who saw the importance for students to be involved in the university. And I'm really proud that I stayed there the entire 4 years. I just couldn't leave. I became so attached.
Absolutely. Diane, did you work while you were in college?
Absolutely. I'm glad my parents had me work from the time I was old enough to do so. My first job, I was the nut girl at the Sears candy department. Isn't that right up my alley?
Oh, my God, I can see it today.
I'd roast nuts, and I'd go out and I'd give out hot nuts to everybody in the store and get them really enticed to go buy some. So that was my first job, and I did do that in high school. And then when I went on to Francis Marion, I actually worked on campus in the student aid department. I helped young people come in and fill out their applications for student aid. I also helped grade papers for many of the professors. I babysat for all of the professors' children, and many of whom are grown professionals today. And I also worked at the Treasure City department store in the ladies' department. And a very interesting thing happened, Greg, while I was working at Treasure City, which is still there, by the way. It's not a department store per se. I think they play bingo there now. But many years ago, while I worked at Treasure City, one Thanksgiving, when Santa Claus was scheduled to arrive that day, all these hundreds and hundreds of children were lined up at Treasure City to see Santa Claus. And what would happen, Greg, is that people would bring their kids, they'd watch Santa Claus land on the roof, parachute onto the roof of the Treasure City department store, and then, of course, Santa would greet the kids. But that morning, the Santa Claus, who, of course, was a different Santa than the one that landed on the roof, showed up at work intoxicated.
Oh, no.
And the general manager had a fit because he had hundreds of kids waiting to talk to Santa Claus. And, of course, the Santa who arrived on the roof was an Air Force person who was getting ready to go back to the Air Force. His job was only to land on the roof. So I told the manager that I could do this. And he said, "You're a woman, you can't do Santa Claus." I said, "Trust me, you're desperate, your Santa Claus is drunk, and I'm all you got. And because I'm a cheerleader at Francis Marion, I can talk really low, and I can at least get you through today." So he looked at his assistant manager and he said, "Take her back to the notions department, wrap her in cotton, put her in the suit, and just let her go at it."
No.
Well, I did it, and it was wonderful. I mean, I love kids. It was a great opportunity to do something fun for the day instead of work in the ladies department. And I was actually quite good at it. They hired me for the rest of the season. And I actually was hired back the next year to be Santa Claus again.
You were kidding. Did you? There must have been incredible notoriety from that. Were you the only female Santa Claus?
Actually, you've always heard the term, Greg, that it's your 15 minutes of fame. To this day, my 15 minutes of fame truly came with being Santa Claus at the Treasure City department store. The Florence Morning News came out and did a story. WBTW did a video clip. As a matter of fact, I have the video clip to this day. I still have it. I should have brought it to you.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, next thing I knew, the story went across the Associated Press.
Yeah.
And I was on front-page papers all across the country. Even the Anchorage, Alaska Times, I made the front page, full-page picture of me as Santa Claus. And what happened was, in that particular time, it was picked up as a women's liberation story. Well, I wasn't a women's liber. I would never burn my bra. What can I say? And they all picked it up as a women's lib story when it wasn't, in fact, the case at all. The fact was Santa Claus was drunk. I was there. I loved kids. I did a great job, and that's why I did it. But because it appeared to be during the women's liberation movement, I got pinned as a women's liber. But, Greg, I got marriage proposals from prison. I got offers for Playboy magazine. I got all kinds of offers. That was my 15 minutes of fame. And now, 30 years into my career, what can I say? I still haven't been quite that famous again.
That is hilarious. Well, you were a famous gem for both the Strand and the PD, so I sure wouldn't think that 15 minutes of fame has expanded into many, many hours. How about, I was about to ask, what's your first theatrical experience on a stage, but that may have been kind of a mini experience. Were you on stage prior to serving as Santa Claus?
Yes. Actually, back in grammar school, whenever we would have any special features, any kind of programs, I remember doing a musical review when I was in the 4th grade. We kind of did a musical salute to the states of the United States. And I was asked to do a little song and dance routine with 2 or 3 other friends to Chicago, to the song Chicago. Not from the Broadway musical, but, Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town. And also another skit from another state, actually New York. And so I just remember loving it and being on stage in the 4th grade and just going, I love this. And all the other kids were nervous and breaking out in sweats and hives, and I couldn't wait to get on stage. And then, needless to say, as the years went on, I continued with those kinds of things at school. And Francis Marion didn't have a theater department when I was there. However, my senior year, all the English classes got together and did a little play, and I had the opportunity to do that. That was long before the theater department opened up at Francis Marion. And then, obviously, I got involved with the Florence Little Theater when I was in Florence, and now, of course, very active with community theater here in Horry County.
What do you think prompts folks to get involved in community theaters?
Probably a lot of reasons. For those who get involved in community theater for ego, they're missing the boat, because it's not about ego. There are people who do that. There's nothing greater than hearing the applause. I mean, Greg, it's wonderful to be on television and to do radio and to do all these wonderful things, but being live and feeling the audience and seeing the audience, there's nothing better. For me, it's a heart-to-heart experience dealing with an audience live on stage. But needless to say, there are a lot of people who get involved in community theater who aren't on stage. Those of us who like to be on stage couldn't do it without the people behind the scenes, just like you with all the guys here at the station. You have to have a teamwork sort of spirit. You have to realize that we are all doing a show to raise money to do the next show. And that's very, very much the truth. You're raising money for the theater to pursue this further, so we can have 3 more shows during this year. It's certainly a love of the art.
Truly. And another love came into life in the early 70s. Your first position in broadcasting. What prompted that, Diane?
My first love in broadcasting was Doug Williams, and Doug Williams, of course, is a well-known, for my friends in Horry County who don't know Doug, very well known, of course, throughout the PD area, the golden vocal cords of the PD. Doug had been on the air for many, many years on radio and freelancing on television. And while I was in high school, I met Doug Williams at a Civitan meeting one night. I was the high school Civinet president at McClinigan High School, and Doug was being honored as the broadcaster of the year by the local Civitan club. We met and fell in love with each other as tremendous friends that night, and he would tease me. He heard me get up and speak that night, and he said, when you graduate someday, you come back and work with me. Well, needless to say, when I went on to be a student at Francis Marion, I had an opportunity to go join Doug on radio just as a guest and promote the college. And he'd still say, when you finish school, you got to come work with me someday. So when I finished school, I called him, and he had an opportunity to have a co-host on the show. And it was just a blessing for me, because I had a chance to do live radio. And after you've done live anything, taped is nothing. And for 7.5 years, I had the opportunity from 73 to 78. And then I actually went back for a year in 84. And I worked with Doug for somewhere in the 80s. I went back and worked with Doug for another year, and it was just a dream come true. He taught me everything that I needed to know, because I didn't major in broadcasting. I majored in English and journalism, minored in sociology, and I really wanted to write, not talk. But Doug saw a talent in me and said, you have a gift, and I want to help you nurture it. And not only did he hire me to do this morning show, the holiday show with him, which he had done for years and years, but he also took me by the hand out to Channel 13, which, of course, WBTW was the only TV station in the market at that time, and showed me how to run the recording machine so that I could record audio voiceovers. And at that time, we were being paid $5 to do a voiceover, and it was a long haul out to the TV station for $5, but it was great experience. But Doug Williams really is my greatest mentor and friend. He directed me in a path that totally changed my life.
That's fantastic. It's great to think about friends like Doug Williams. And, of course, he was instrumental helping WPDF, or WEYV formerly, which we had, and unfortunately went off the air at one point, but he was instrumental, and even later in life, helping out the Fox 43 family. What was that like the first time You went on air, Diane. What was, you imagine the first time for anyone, think back to Larry King or someone his first time on radio, and I'm sure there were first-time jitters. What was that like for you? Of course, Doug, you'd been on air otherwise, but as a co-host, what was that like?
Well, luckily, like I said, I felt so secure in the arms, so to speak, of Doug Williams,
Yes.
who had been doing it for so long, and we had a great rapport on the air. It's not often that people can co-host a show together and have that kind of magnetism, but we just clicked. And I would tease Doug, and I'd call him Daddy Doug, and he'd call me Diane Ding-a-ling, and we had just a great rapport. And I was really never nervous doing that. I remember the first time, though, Doug invited me to come out and get involved with a telethon at Channel 13. We hosted the Muscular Dystrophy telethons together for, I guess about 10 years, and also the March of Dimes telethons. And that made me nervous, my first TV appearance, because it was just so unique. Most of my appearances, as I said, had been more like on stage or, in front of people doing a musical sort of thing. But, this was just totally different. But needless to say, it wasn't anything that intimidated me so much I was going to run in the other direction. It was actually an incredibly rewarding experience.
Absolutely, and that prompted your exposure on a daily talk show. I think, can you tell the viewers a little about your first launch as a daily talk show host, or were you both producer and host? This was PD People, I guess, on WPDE back in 81?
81, very good, Greg, absolutely. It was very difficult because I had an opportunity to leave the holiday show and go to work for WPDE when they first went on the air. They offered me a daily talk show. I didn't want to leave Doug, but as Doug would tell you, if he was sitting here, it was not a big salary job. I had another job. I was also the director of sales for 2 Holiday Inns in town while I did the radio show. So it was a matter of leaving both of those positions to take one. Well, frankly, it was something I always wanted to do, and Doug loved me enough and wanted me to pursue this. He said, Diane, it's what you need to do. I don't want you to leave. I'm going to miss you, but this is what you need to do. And he encouraged me just like a father would encourage a daughter. You need to try this. And so I took the job with WPDE, and for 3 years I hosted and produced PD People, much like you do here. And I have to tell you, it was a wonderful experience because I was the host and producer. I did line up all the guests. And that's a good thing, though, because I feel that in lining up the guests, you really do have a chance to talk with them on the phone, you get to know them, you get to know the issues long before they get to the studio. I mean, as you know, Oprah has 14 different producers, but in small-time television, what folks need to know is that most of the time, the host is serving as the producer and sometimes running camera, too. So it was a wonderful experience because, it just really gave me an opportunity to learn the production end of television as well as the on-camera end.
Absolutely. You remember, from your early days, do you have any memories that stick out in your mind from particularly helping PD launch in the early 80s and PD People?
Well, there's no doubt that live is always interesting. One of the neat things that I don't have a chance to do today with my current talk show at Time Warner Cable in Myrtle Beach is we used to take live phone calls. And, of course, I learned to handle live phone calls from the live radio show that I had done with Doug Williams. And with live, you never knew what anyone was going to say, and you never knew how they were going to behave, and there's no chance to edit. And we took live phone calls, and I could tell you stories that you wouldn't want to hear on the air, but we had a lot of wild and crazy things happen with live phone calls. You just never knew what you were going to get. But it was always a great connection with the public. And even when there were obscene phone calls, you would just ignore them and go on to the next one. And you would just encourage that behavior to stop because you're wasting our time, and you just move on. So that's got to be one of the most interesting things about doing live television. But I had a lovely opportunity to meet some great people. I interviewed Dizzy Gillespie. I had a chance to meet Dolly Parton for the first time through PD People. One of my greatest memories, though, of doing PD People, Greg, was an interview that I did with astronaut Ronald McNair. And astronaut Ronald McNair had come back to the PD area to be saluted. He had a street named after him in Lake City because he was the first black astronaut. But Ronald McNair told me a story on the air that always will stick with me forever. And I tell youth groups and kids when I go out to the schools that you can be anything you want to be if you have the drive and determination to do that. It's not about money. It's not about anything but determination. And Ronald McNair made that very evident that day with me on television when he told the story how being a little black child in Lake City, South Carolina, he was not able to use the library because they didn't allow blacks in the library at that time. And Ronald used to sneak to a local drugstore. And after school, he would sit on the floor of the drugstore and he would read the popular science magazines. And there was a pharmacist at the drugstore who befriended Ronald. And he said, "Son, when I first moved to Lake City, being of the Jewish faith," he said, "a lot of people didn't like me. Believe me, when they get to know you, you'll be accepted and things will change." And he said, "But what can I do to help you?" And he said, "Well, I want to study about space and I want to get some books on science." And so this pharmacist agreed to meet Ronald once a week at that drugstore, and he checked books out of the library on space exploration for Ronald. And needless to say, back then there wasn't probably not a whole lot of books on space exploration, but on science and technology. And Ronald told me that story. And it was just an incredible story of someone who really beat all the odds to go on and be an astronaut. And then an ironic twist of that, too, Greg, is that when Ronald died in the space shuttle explosion, Chuck and I were both living at Myrtle Beach at the time, and Chuck was now working for Channel 13 at their Myrtle Beach office, and he was hired to do a documentary on Ronald's life. And I told Chuck that story. And we found the pharmacist. He was living in Hollywood, South Carolina, and he was just absolutely overwhelmed that anyone knew the story. And we included that in the documentary of Ronald McNair. As a matter of fact, Chuck's documentary on Ronald McNair has been entered in the Library of Congress in the section on black history as well as in the section on space exploration. So it was kind of interesting that a story that I had heard Ronald tell himself was really brought forth to the public as a result.
Wow, that is powerful.
It's probably
Diane.
my greatest memory of WPDE and my involvement with PD people.
Diane, that's such a powerful story, but I'm so glad you mentioned Chuck. When did you and Chuck join forces?
How could I not mention Chuck? He's certainly the best part of my life. I met Chuck at WPDE. We met and fell in love on the job. We were the first love affair at WPDE. No matter what's going on now, just know we were the first. And it was such a blessing to meet Chuck. I had prayed for Prince Charming to finally come into my life, and he did. And we'll be celebrating 19 years of marriage in September, and every day is a gift. We are best friends even now. We started out as friends. I used to fix Chuck up with other girls in Florence, and then I realized that I was missing out on the best guy around. And I finally said, whoa, So anyway, it is a great opportunity to work and play with your soulmate because, as you know, we own our own video production company in Myrtle Beach with Stages Video Productions. And I go to Time Warner and do a talk show every Monday, tape 5 shows in one day, and then the rest of the week I'm with Chuck at Stages Video. So it works great. I do the marketing and the script writing. Chuck does the shooting and editing, and he is certainly the genius behind the operation. He could run the place without me, but I could never do it without him.
Golly, Diane, that's amazing. It's so exciting to think. And you all moved down to the beach back in '84?
Right, absolutely. PD People was canceled in 1984, and I was offered a chance to anchor the news. I never wanted to do the news. PDE begged me to stay to do the news because I had lived in Florence most of my life. Everyone knew me and it would be great for ratings, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a talk show, and the show was canceled 6 weeks before I got married, and Chuck and I just saw it as an omen to move to the beach. We always wanted to live in Myrtle Beach, and we weren't sure how we were going to get there. Well, can you imagine getting married and then 1 week later moving to Myrtle Beach without jobs? But we wanted to live in Myrtle Beach bad enough that we were determined that if we had to wait on tables, we would make a go of it.
Wow.
And luckily, we did not wait on tables, but we did pick up some crazy jobs in an effort to make a living and remain here. And we're very lucky that sooner than later, TV jobs did open up for us.
Right, and at what point did you hook up with Cox, now Time Warner, and begin Southern Style?
Fortunately, Greg, only 3 months after moving here, Cox Cable had a little television operation at the time and knew that I had done a TV show out of Florence, and they offered me Southern Style. When Cox Cable became Time Warner, fortunately, the powers that be kept me on, and 19 years later, I still host and produce Southern Style at Time Warner Cable. You know this, Greg, and of course, being not only the host and producer of your show, but also as the general manager, people have to really recognize and respect stations that give this kind of public service time, because a lot of stations across the country now only go for the bucks. And there's more bucks in news, and there's more bucks in selling commercial time than in this public service aspect of a talk show. So I salute you for having the show and giving the community public airtime and the opportunity to be a voice.
Well, that's kind, Diane. Of course, the real salute is to you, who is both the host and producer. I have the benefit of Loretta, who is an incredible producer for this show and really makes it happen. But it makes me think about influential people. Loretta for me, and influential people in my life. Can you think, would Doug Williams be somebody who's really been one of the greatest inspirations for you, Diane?
Absolutely. Doug Williams is my mentor, my dear friend, and I love him very much. He's like another dad to me. But I am very blessed to have two wonderful parents, a great dad and a wonderful mom who has inspired me every day to live, love, and laugh. And that is really a blessing that came from my family to me, and it's kind of the way I live every day. Yes. So between my parents and Doug, I've been surrounded by some great role models.
Absolutely. We've got less than a minute. If there was any one thing that you've done, Diane, that you would recognize in your life as having been one of the most important things you've done, what do you think that'd be?
Marry Chuck.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Because, so many times we make mistakes and we don't know how to pick up and go on. I'm very lucky that I met Chuck at a time that I most needed him in my life. And, I've never been really crazy about the word soulmate, but the best friend I've ever had is Chuck Stokes. And to think that he's my lover, my friend, and my partner in business, we've got it all, and I'm so blessed. I never take it for granted. Thank God every day.
Absolutely. She's got it all. Chuck Stokes, the benefit of having been brought into the industry, Doug Williams, great parents.
And great friends like you.
And wonderful loved ones and friends around, and having brought the message of Ron McNair and that pharmacist so many years ago to the people, to the community, and now to the Library of Congress. Diane, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me back, and I really appreciate your friendship. Thanks, Greg.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People coming up next. We want to thank Diane DeVaughn Stokes for making today's Carolina People so special. And if you're a Time Warner viewer in Horry, Georgetown, or Williamsburg counties, tune in to Southern Style weekdays, 10 a.m., 7:30 p.m. on channels 5 and 17.